All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we talked about in this section. So, our learning topic one was all about a convenient sample. Like I said last lesson, there's lots of vocab in this chapter. So, convenient sample is another vocabulary word. So, convenient samples are samples that we take when choosing people who are easy to reach. So, an example of this would be um, like if you wanted to sample teenagers, you just went to the mall, or you just wanted to sample people. You stood in front of the mall or in front of Walmart and just picked people that were easy to reach rather than kind of randomly sampling the entire population. Um, Typically, with convenient sampling, we see a lot of bias, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. We saw in our activity convenient sampling by looking at words that our eyes were drawn to, and our eyes are drawn to longer words. Okay. Our second form of bias and our second learning goal was all about voluntary response bias or voluntary response. To have a sample that has voluntary response, these are people that volunteer to call in, write in, vote online. So you have the choice on whether or not you're responding to a certain survey or you're a part of a sample. So typically, what we see with voluntary response is we get the people who are really passionate about something. Okay, so you get one extreme over the other. That's how it lends to bias, where we consistently biases when we consistently over or underestimate the actual truth of the data. And so this is one that shows up so often. And why we talk about both convenience and voluntary response bias is because they're the most common. Okay. People want to collect data easily rather than do it well. Okay. So both of these types of collections are not good ways to collect data. Okay, our good way to collect data is with a random sample. Okay, random samples or simple random samples. A lot of times you'll see me abbreviate it as SRS. You might want to jot that in your notes so that you know what SRS stands for, simple random sample. Okay. This uses random chance to pick the people in our sample or the different data points in our sample so that we don't have bias. Okay. So we get random chance. We look at, if we're looking at the population of PV, I'm going to use a random number generator and then at a list of all of the students. Um, Maybe listed alphabetically instead of even by grade level. Okay, there's lots of things we can do to help balance out our data and get closer to the truth, and randomly picking who is being sampled is a good way to do that. Part of why we talk about this is because most of the time it's not convenient to sample or to collect data from an entire population. It's hard to get data from every teenager in the United States, or it's really even getting data from every student at PV, which has about 14 to 1500 students at it. It's super hard to get data from every single one. So in a lot of cases, we want to pick a sample of them and then make generalizations about the overall population. So the more balanced our sample is, the more random it is, the closer to the actual truth of the population it will be. So, we're going to keep talking about this as we move through, looking at different ways to look at collecting data for samples, whether it be a survey or whether it be an experiment, we are trying to avoid bias, especially voluntary and response bias, and we want simple random samples, or at least for whatever our sample to be random. And that's it. Go ahead and try out the application problem, and I will work that with you as soon as you are done.